We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary, Graham Vickers said with that smug smirk during my termination meeting, the words dripping with the kind of arrogance that comes from thinking experience is replaceable, nothing personal, just cost-cutting. My name is Victor Hale, 55 years old, lead systems engineer at Veltria Housing for 18 years, a man who had spent nearly 2 decades building the backbone of a company that now considered me expendable. I had designed, coded, and maintained the entire infrastructure from scratch, creating intricate redundancies, security layers, and custom systems that ran so flawlessly that the executives had stopped noticing the invisible work that kept everything afloat until they decided it was too expensive to retain me. Across from me sat Graham Vickers, the new chief technology officer, 6 months into his tenure, 42, polished with designer glasses and a Cornell MBA, the type brought in to implement modernization in the form of eliminating the most seasoned staff first. Diane from HR slid a folder across the table, her voice pleasant but impersonal. The severance package is generous, she said, outlining 2 months' salary plus accrued vacation time. I nodded, taking the folder in my hands, and asked evenly, "Thank you." "Is that all you have to say?" Graham's eyes flickered, perhaps disappointed, as if expecting a performance, an argument, a threat, a scene to justify his decision to the board. "What would you like me to say? Most people in your position have questions, concerns," I shrugged. "Seems pretty straightforward to me." They exchanged confused glances. They didn't understand that I wasn't calm, I was simply done. There is a difference between calm and finished, and they had mistaken it for composure. "Well, we'd appreciate your help with the transition," Graham added, attempting to maintain authority. "The new engineering team will need guidance on the system architecture. Perhaps a consulting arrangement for a few weeks. I'll think about it," I said, fully aware I had no intention of helping them unravel the complex network I had built over 18 years. We shook hands, and I methodically cleared my desk, 18 years of work condensed into a single cardboard box. Colleagues averted their eyes, unsure whether to offer words of comfort or avoid acknowledging my fate. I walked to my truck in the parking garage, the fluorescent lights bouncing off the concrete, and my phone buzzed with a text from Alan, the database administrator I had hired 12 years earlier. "This is Vic. The whole team's freaking out." I didn't respond. At home, I sat on my deck overlooking Lake Ontario, the evening sun reflecting molten copper on the water. I sipped bourbon, letting the cool air mix with the warmth of the fading sun. Elaine, my wife, placed a hand on my shoulder. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. I shrugged, letting the silence stretch. Something will turn up. What Graham didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just built their systems. I had personally written large sections of the code, embedding intricate redundancies, security protocols, and subtle integration points that only someone with 18 years' experience could navigate. Proper documentation had been denied. For years, considered an unnecessary expense. Only I understood the architecture's complexity, and I had no intention of teaching it to anyone who had devalued my worth. I started at what was then Bayview Properties, a small real estate firm with 4 apartment complexes and barely a dozen employees. The IT infrastructure consisted of 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, and a slow dial-up connection. Harold Bay, the owner, hired me away from a consulting role in Syracuse. "We're expanding," he told me. "We need someone who can build something that lasts." Over 18 years, I transformed that rudimentary setup into a fully integrated property management system, capable of handling tenant applications, background checks, automated maintenance requests, and rent collection across 63 properties in 4 states. When Harold retired 5 years ago, his son Justin sold the company to a private equity firm, rebranding it as Veltria Housing. I was retained, but slowly, the culture shifted. New executives arrived. Quarterly KPIs took precedence over long-term stability, and my proposals were consistently ignored. My suggestion to build a documentation team was deemed too expensive, indefinitely postponed. Consultants arrived, young MBAs with innovative cloud strategies, but they never understood the custom systems I had built. I explained the architecture, demonstrated the code, highlighted the integration points, but their glazed eyes and off-the-shelf recommendations revealed their inability to grasp the depth of the work. Gradually, I was excluded from planning meetings. Elaine noticed the shift before I did. "They're pushing you out," she warned over dinner one night. You need to prepare. They need me, I argued. No one else understands the system as I do. That might be exactly the problem, she replied, the words lingering. 6 months ago, Graham joined, arriving from banking software with a penchant for standardization. He hired 3 fresh graduates, had them shadow me, asked questions I patiently answered, knowing they lacked the years of experience necessary to truly comprehend the system's complexity. Last week, he mentioned a quick quarterly check-in, a meeting that should have set off alarms in my mind. 2 weeks after my termination, the first call came. Graham Vickers, my former boss, reaching out about the tenant portal. The junior engineers couldn't handle my code. Could I help? I let it go to voicemail, deleted the message, returned to my resume updates. More calls came, each voicemail increasingly desperate. Texts from Alan painted a picture of chaos. The system was down, maintenance requests unprocessed, tenants frustrated, and Graham losing control. Diane from HR called the next morning, offering a consulting arrangement, generously compensated, $300 per hour for a minimum of 4 hours. I paused, contemplating, then returned to the Lakeview. Over 3 days, the calls multiplied. The tenant portal crashed repeatedly, automated payments failed, maintenance requests froze, and my former colleagues scrambled in vain. I didn't answer. On the 4th day, an email arrived from Devlin Systems, a regional competitor. Lawrence Devlin, their director of technology, reached out, offering a discussion about upgrading their property management infrastructure and acknowledging my reputation. That evening, Graham appeared unannounced at my door, glasses askew, suit wrinkled, pleading. The entire system was down. Substantial consulting fee offered. I looked at the cardboard box in my garage, 18 years of work distilled into remnants, and thought of the repeated justification, nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I thought of the documentation team they refused to fund. I said quietly, I'm sorry to hear about your troubles. I have an interview tomorrow. I closed the door, feeling a clarity I had not felt in years, neither satisfaction nor vindication, simply the certainty that I would not help them untangle what they had allowed to crumble. The interview with Lawrence went beyond expectations. Coffee shop in downtown Rochester, neutral territory, no interference from either company. He praised my Veltria system, emphasizing reliability, integration, and the potential for Devlin to build something better with my expertise. He offered me the position of chief systems architect, full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than Veltria. I accepted. Veltria's problems escalated. Alan's texts described partial restorations, failed critical functions, and consultants unable to recover key systems. Graham called, pleading for assistance. I calmly declined, asserting my exclusive contract. Money was irrelevant, respect for expertise mattered. The board even offered a return with full salary plus bonus. I refused. Legal threats followed, accusations that I had sabotaged the systems. I reminded them all code belonged to Veltria, my knowledge alone had left. At Devlin, we started fresh, full documentation, redundancies, training, scalable architecture, and a team that understood the work it takes to maintain robust systems. A month later, Alan appeared at my office, revealing that half Veltria's IT department had quit. Consultants estimated 6 months to restore functionality, and Veltria's largest client, Westbrook Properties, threatened to leave, jeopardizing 30% of revenue. I brought Alan onto Devlin, laying the foundation for a team that respected experience, planning, and reliable systems. Weeks at Devlin Systems became a blur of strategic planning, architecture design, and team building, but the shadows of Veltria's collapse lingered, reminders of the chaos I had left behind. Lawrence entrusted me with not just rebuilding infrastructure, but scaling the company's capabilities in anticipation of taking on Westbrook Properties' vast portfolio, more than doubling Devlin's current operations. I mapped the entire project from end to end, breaking down complex data migration pathways, modularizing every system component for scalability, and embedding redundancies that ensured no single failure could bring the entire operation to a halt. We hired 5 additional engineers, including 2 who had recently departed Veltria Infrastration, individuals who understood the demands of maintaining highly integrated systems. Alan, my longtime database administrator, built tools to translate Veltria's corrupted data structures into ours without compromising integrity, while I oversaw security, integration, and workflow efficiency. Meanwhile, Veltria's desperation continued to make itself known. Graham's calls became more frequent, more frantic, each one an echo of the incompetence that resulted from undervaluing experience. He called pleading for input on failed payment, processing, broken maintenance schedules, and tenant portal outages. I stayed calm, answering only once to make the principle clear. No, I would not salvage what they had recklessly allowed to collapse. The chaos at Veltria only strengthened Devlin's position, and within weeks, Westbrook Properties was officially seeking alternatives, threatening to terminate their contract unless they could rely on a robust, reliable system. Lawrence and I worked through nights, reviewing every component, planning stage rollouts, training our engineering team, and preparing contingency plans that Veltria had never implemented. 10 weeks into the 12-week timeline, we were ready to begin phased migration, starting with Westbrook's smallest region in western New York, 2,000 units, a pilot that would determine whether the remaining regions could follow. The day before migration, Lawrence brought me into his office to meet Jeffrey Westbrook in person. The CEO stood tall, observant, scrutinizing the plans I had laid out, shaking my hand, and acknowledging that the system I had designed would not collapse under growth, a rare acknowledgement in a field where promises frequently failed against operational reality. He understood the value of experience, of detailed planning, and of the lessons learned from observing Veltria's failure. The migration proceeded in phases, each stage monitored meticulously, errors logged, redundancies tested, backups verified, and the team trained to respond to every contingency. Meanwhile, Veltria's collapse became public in small industry whispers, delayed payments, incorrect maintenance schedules, angry tenants, and board members scrambling to contain the fallout. Emails between Graham and the board, uncovered by Alan and shared discreetly, revealed months of planning to cut costs at my expense, labeling my systems unnecessarily complex and assuming that inexperienced engineers could replicate my work with off-the-shelf solutions. The private equity firm, blinded by the prospect of a profitable sale, had followed Graham's recommendations blindly, unaware that every decision to reduce senior staff, ignore documentation, and prioritize short-term savings over system reliability had paved the way for their impending disaster. Even as I focused on building Devlin's systems, I felt a sense of satisfaction, not in vengeance but in correctness. Systems built properly, teams trained fully, and experience valued. Veltria's consultants struggled to comprehend the intricacies, repeatedly failing to restore functions that had been meticulously crafted over nearly 2 decades. Westbrook's team began to report confidence in our solutions, impressed by the foresight, documentation, and redundancy layers we had implemented. The migration continued without a single critical failure, proving the difference between systems built quickly and cheaply versus systems engineered thoughtfully and maintained meticulously. Each successful phase reinforced the contrast between Devlin's deliberate growth and Veltria's frantic, misguided cost-cutting measures. Midway through the migration, I received another call from Graham, his tone softer now, desperation thinly veiled beneath an attempt at authority. He asked whether I would reconsider a temporary consultancy arrangement. I paused, recalling the board's previous offers, the legal threats, the countless calls demanding I fix what they broke. Calmly, I replied, I cannot help you. The systems I built remain your property, but the knowledge to maintain them requires someone who values experience. There was a long silence. He tried again, offering double the previous consulting fee, but I refused once more. This was not about money, it was about principle and recognition of labor, skill, and foresight. Devlin continued to grow steadily, absorbing Westbrook's portfolio as planned, each step validating our architecture, documentation, and methodical approach. New engineers joined, trained on our systems from day one, understanding not only the code but the reasoning behind each integration point, each redundancy, each security protocol. The system was no longer just software, it was a living framework, built to endure and scale. Veltria's decline became a cautionary tale within the industry, highlighting the consequences of disregarding experienced talent and undervaluing thorough system documentation. The contrast was stark. Devlin's success versus Veltria's near collapse, a living testament to the strategic patience, expertise, and foresight that had guided me through nearly 2 decades of system architecture. As the final phase of the migration approached, I reflected on the journey from the initial cardboard box containing 18 years of my work to the fully documented, robust, scalable system that now governed Westbrook's portfolio. I understood the value of knowledge, the irreplaceable worth of experience, and the tangible outcomes of systems built properly from inception. Veltria's board reached out once more, apologies and offers of reinstatement trickling in, but I had learned the hard lesson of aligning with those who respected, rather than exploited, expertise. I declined, committed entirely to Devlin and the principles on which we had built the infrastructure that now supported one of the largest property management portfolios in the Northeast. The company's future was no longer in the hands of those who sought shortcuts. It was in the hands of a team trained, documented, and prepared for sustainable growth, the culmination of years of meticulous work, foresight, and a refusal to compromise on standards or quality. The final weeks of migration at Devlin Systems were a testament to planning, discipline, and the value of experience, each milestone confirming the robustness of the system we had built. Westbrook Properties' portfolio was now fully integrated. The staged rollouts complete, tenant data secure, maintenance requests processed seamlessly, and automated payment systems functioning without error. I had created not only software, but a living framework, one that could scale without collapse, supported by engineers who understood every layer, every contingency, every subtle interdependency. News of Veltria's continuing failures reached me sporadically through Alan's discreet updates. Tenants were still being overcharged, maintenance requests went unfulfilled for days, historical payment records remained inaccessible, and the expensive consulting teams had failed to bridge the gap my departure had created. Graham's calls became increasingly rare, each one tinged with frustration and desperation. He had realized, too late, that cost-cutting decisions cannot replace deep institutional knowledge. Emails between the Veltria board members that Alan had uncovered painted a grim picture. Graham had assured them that replacing senior staff with junior engineers and off-the-shelf solutions would save millions. Yet now the company faced a potential loss of its largest client, Westbrook, and irreparable damage to its reputation. At Devlin, I worked tirelessly alongside my team, mentoring new hires, reinforcing training, and ensuring documentation was never an afterthought but a cornerstone of our operations. The modular architecture we had implemented allowed for incremental scaling and minimal disruption, a stark contrast to Veltria's ad hoc approach and short-sighted restructuring. Within 2 months, Devlin's credibility and market position had expanded dramatically. Industry clients took notice of a company capable of handling enormous portfolios without breakdowns, reflecting not only technical prowess but the foresight and discipline required to maintain complex systems. Veltria, by comparison, had become a cautionary tale, a company that traded experience for perceived cost savings and paid a steep price for neglecting the long-term health of its infrastructure. My reflections on the journey, 18 years of building, 18 years of knowledge, consolidated into practice, reminded me of the intangible value of expertise, diligence, and persistence. The contrast was personal, professional, and absolute. A company that recognized and respected its talent, like Devlin, flourished, while one that undervalued and discarded it, like Veltria, struggled to survive. I received one final message from Justin Bayou, the former owner's son, attempting an apology, acknowledging the board had been misled, and extending a vague invitation to return. I did not respond. The lesson had been learned. Trust and respect for knowledge are irreplaceable, and no monetary incentive could undo the damage caused by ignoring them. As the Westbrook migration stabilized and Devlin's systems ran flawlessly, I felt a quiet sense of resolution, not triumph or revenge, but clarity. The chaos I had left behind at Veltria was theirs to resolve. I had built something lasting, scalable, and respected, and I had assembled a team that understood the responsibility that came with it. Each engineer on our team shared the same understanding. Systems must be designed with foresight, documented with precision, and maintained with diligence, for failure is not always a result of technical error, but of neglecting the human element that sustains them. 2 months into the post-migration period, I walked through the Devlin office, observing engineers collaborating seamlessly, noting redundancies, discussing architecture, and implementing features with an awareness of the past mistakes that Veltria had made. I realized that my work was no longer invisible, that every line of code, every training module, every documented protocol was now part of a legacy built on foresight and discipline, one that could survive personnel changes and market pressures without collapse. Veltria's implosion continued in parallel, clients leaving, systems faltering, and executives scrambling, all consequences of decisions made in boardrooms that failed to appreciate experience and the careful labor it took to maintain complex infrastructures. I understood that some lessons cannot be taught. They must be experienced. The quiet satisfaction I felt was in knowing that the systems I had built at Devlin would endure, that my team would uphold the standards I had set, and that future growth would rest on principles of diligence, documentation, and respect for expertise. Graham and the former Veltria executives had learned the hard way that shortcuts and cost-cutting in complex systems carry consequences, but for me, it was no longer my problem to solve. I had moved forward, creating an environment where mistakes of the past could not repeat, where each engineer could understand the depth of the architecture, and where the work was valued for the knowledge, skill, and foresight required to produce it. Reflecting on the journey from that cardboard box in the parking garage to a fully operational, documented, scalable infrastructure at Devlin, I felt clarity and peace. Not revenge, not triumph, simply the satisfaction of knowing that careful work, integrity, and respect for expertise had lasting value, far beyond any boardroom decision or cost-cutting measure. And as I looked out over the city from the Devlin office, I knew that this was not just a victory for me but for the team, the clients, and the future of responsible, sustainable engineering lessons built brick by brick, code by code, carefully, and intentionally, and finally respected in a way that Veltria never would.